Hello, welcome back to Emerge, the health podcast for busy, high-performing women. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley. I'm really excited for today's guest because we're going to have a conversation that is very applicable to many of you. I know from the clients I actually work with, and I'm sure our listeners. And it's just going to be good. So let me go ahead and introduce. I'm joined by Darcy Eikenberg, who has worn a lot of hats in her life. She's been an executive coach to leaders at organizations such as the Coca-Cola Company, Microsoft, State Farm, Deloitte Consulting, and more. She consults and speaks about career growth, employee engagement, and leadership development all over the world. And she's the author of Bring Your Superpowers to Work, Your Guide to More Clarity, Confidence, and Control, and blogs regularly on leadership and career issues at Red Cape Revolution. And she has a new book, I know, about not quitting your job and all of that. So I'll let you share about that, Darcy, but welcome to the show.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Alex. I am so happy to be here. Yeah, the new book is called Red Cape Rescue, Save Your Career Without Leaving Your Job. And it's really a guide to how we can take back more control in our life at work.
Awesome. And so applicable to so many. So I know we have a lot of directions we can go from our brief little conversation before we hit record. But let's start. I would like to hear some of your story and kind of how you got to this point where you're, talking with women specifically, but around career and transition and change and
yeah. So, my story looked like a lot of people that I now am fortunate to work with, probably some of the kinds of people that you get the opportunity to work with, where I looked good on paper. I had a big corporate job. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of terrific people around me. I made good money. I had a good team. And I realized one day I had just been growing and getting new opportunities every 3 years or so. But at some point, my boss decided she was going to retire. And when I heard that, I realized I don't want that job. I said, if I don't want the next job up, what's next for me? And I hadn't really ever done any of that introspection because things just kind of going along, and I was just chugging along, doing my thing, living my life, and just thinking, well, this is just how work is. This is, we just keep following whatever the next thing that's put in front of us. And so that moment, and actually I describe it in the book, it actually happened. I got the phone call in a cold McDonald's parking lot. I pulled over off the highway to be able to get the call from my boss because I had no idea why she's calling me. And it just, really changed everything to make me stop and say, if the next step for me isn't obvious, then I've got to do the work to figure it out. And that's when I hired my first professional coach. And I knew nothing at the time about what coaching was. And this was a while ago in the wild, wild west. But, and people would look at me and they'd say, oh, well, of course you want to stay at this great company. Of course there's another role for you. Or why are you just happy where you are? And I really had to do the personal work to say, what was it that was in my superpower space? What was the work that I wanted to do? I never thought I would have my own professional coaching business. But that came through the opportunity to really be the person helping people grow, as opposed to the person out in front doing all the big deals and selling and things like that I had been. And I actually created the opportunity to experiment with some of the new competencies that I was learning about what professional coaching is. And I created an internal coaching program right in my own company, and gave me the opportunity to put my foot in the new world, but also kind of keep a little bit of stability and security where I was. And eventually I said, it's time to jump. If I don't jump and try this full on, I'll never really know. And that's been now, I think, 15 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. So I work with people all over the world around career growth, around leadership development, a lot of up and coming leaders or leaders who are making whatever the next leap for them, whether that's to a different role, to a different type of thing within their organization, or helping them to make those kind of decisions. And then I also do speaking, and obviously the writing of the books, and I have a regular weekly blog that I do. And so it's been a great opportunity to serve people and to stay connected. And my personal story really kind of spurred me on. And I think that happens with a lot of us, that we start teaching and learning what we most need to know.
Absolutely. There's so many things here. And I think for a lot of women who are listening, it's like first just giving yourself permission to say like, hey, this isn't really what I want to be doing, but then like, what does that actually look like? And I went through this, albeit earlier in life probably, but I built like a 7-figure chiropractic practice. And I've talked about it on the show, but there was literally a moment where I walked upstairs and looked around. I just, spent $100,000 remodeling this 6,000 square foot building. And I was like, this isn't my dream. Like, I don't want to actually be doing this.
Yeah. And I bet at that time, everybody's looking at you saying, well, that sounds nuts. I mean, look how hard, she's worked to create this. What a good gig you have. That's what I call looking good on paper, right? But this piece, you used a really important word about permission. And one of the strategies I'll often advise people is to write your own permission slip. Because you remember back when you were a kid and somebody else would give you permission to go to the field trip or to do something that was less supervised. You had to, your school or your organization would give you a permission slip to bring back. Well, as adults, we often are looking for permission. And actually, I joke with some of my clients that very often their intuitive self, they know what they need to do, and they come to a coach to almost validate that or to find the blind spots on it. And I think it's great to look for our blind spots, but often, my job is not to give permission, but to help people recognize they already know the thing that they need to do. Now, how do we get into action? How do we actually make it tangible and real? And that's where the rubber meets the road.
It is, because that piece takes courage and it can be scary. And you might be jumping into something that is unknown up to this point.
Well, it's all unknown. This is the thing that amazes me when people stay stuck in fear or hesitation, is that everything is all made up. We think, oh, there's a right way to do this, or there's a right career path, or the question I hate if I go visit a college campus or something is I'm trying to figure out the right career for me. There's no right career. There's no right stuff. All you can do is put your foot on the next rock that's in front of you right now. You make the best decision you can for what's right in front of you and keep moving forward. I worry sometimes that articles and women's magazines, and we talk about maybe someone making a career change in 700, 500 words, she used to be a banker and now she's a goat farmer and look how happy she is. It's like, those are not doing us any justice, right? Because there's 1,000 steps between that. But you can only tell a career change story in hindsight, but we're all living it in the moment and whatever stage we're at. We've got to give ourselves permission that that's okay. The fact that I don't know exactly what that next step is, but directionally, like, do I feel like I'm making progress? Do I feel like that conversation was a worthwhile conversation? Whatever it is, and we just keep repeating it, moving forward one step at a time.
Yeah. So good on so many levels. So, because I have a lot of clients who are in this position where, like, for some reason, their job is just not doing it for them anymore. It's a source of stress. They know it's keeping them stuck. They don't like it. There's, all the stuff that goes on in their head. Like, what's your step or your process, and like, where do you start with?
Where do you start, right?
Where do you start?
So the first place is to recognize that we only control 3 things. We control what we think, what we say, and what we do. And that is it. I can't control what's going on in the economy. I can't control what's going on in my organization. I can't control, anybody else in my own household. I only control what I think, what I say, and what I do. So when you recognize that you can take back control over those things, a lot of times we've given that control away. We've listen to all the noise in the media that says, oh, if you're not happy at work, then you need to go start your own business. And we think, well, okay, maybe, but is that really what I want? Or, oh, you need to go negotiate for more money. It's like, is that the solution? But we have to stop hearing all those things and think about what do we think, and get clear about picking the thought that moves us forward, which is often a more positive emotion, a more, something that propels us forward, as opposed to all of the fear-based thoughts that pull us back. And I'm sure, Dr. Alex, this comes up in your work a lot too, but you have to recognize that the brain is always just trying to keep us safe and keep us playing small. And when we listen to all the fear-based messages, and even, we think, we just, that little nagging voice in our head, we have to take back control over that narrative, so that we can really listen, what I call listen to the whispers. It's actually a chapter in the book where we can get really clear on what our heroic self, what our true self wants, and start taking action toward that, instead of letting that little lizard brain talk us out of, I should have that conversation with my boss, or maybe I should explore what's happening at that other company that I'm really curious about. So when we're stuck, I think the first thing is to recognize, what do I control? And letting go of everything I can't control, and choosing one thing to start to take action. Maybe I need to take control over my thoughts and stop listening to that lizard brain that says I'm too old, I'm too fat, I'm too short, I'm too tall, whatever. Or maybe I actually need to take control of what I say. Maybe I need to speak up or speak out more, or take control of what I do. Maybe there's a chapter in the book that's become pretty popular called Drop Some Balls. Maybe there's things that are annoying me in my work that I need to stop doing. I need to just recognize this isn't creating any value for the company. It's become busy work, or it's just a habit that maybe it was important 2 years ago. It's not important now. It's a lot of things we actually can stop doing to be able to get rid of a lot of those things that we've been tolerating and things that really drag us down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love your input on this, because I think this is easier to do when you own your own business, because you can just be like, oh, I'm going to stop doing that. And then, either delegate or whatever. And it can be harder. Like, for example, I have a couple of clients who are accountants, and that, that world is what it is. At the time we're recording this, it's tax season. So they've all been very stressed, and there's, breakdowns in communication and leadership, and everyone's understaffed, and there's all this stuff. And so for them, and for anyone else in this position, it's quieting that is what I get that you're saying, and just taking control of your own thoughts and emotions, and not feeling like you have some boundaries with yourself.
Right. Because so it's a great example of professions that we think are so structured and focused, but the fact is every human being is different. And even though there might be, so for example, we're sitting here in the USA today, and today is the tax submission deadline day. But the way that someone got to here, the way that they're handling it, the way they're handling their conversations with their clients, the way that what they're asking other people to do for them, that can vary, on a big basis. And what I find happens a lot of times is we back ourselves into a trap of shoulds, right? We back ourselves into a trap of, well, I should do this, instead of asking the other person, hey, this is how we've done it in the past, but this one aspect of it actually costs us a lot of time and energy. And is there a different way to do it? Or I'd like to do it this way instead, or I'm going to choose to do it this way instead. So the idea of dropping some balls, actually, my audience is a corporate audience. And when we've done this with the women that I work with who are inside what look like traditional project-based organizations, that they realize the way that they work is all made up, and plus much of the work is made up, and they can take a hard look and say, what are all the things that I'm doing is everything I'm doing of value? Is every way I'm doing it actually optimized to help me? So you mentioned boundaries. So things like, am I answering texts in the middle of the night? And I've created a story for myself that says, well, that's being very customer service oriented or being very responsive, which is lovely and fantastic. But if it's draining you instead of contributing to you, we can teach people how to treat us. And we can't do it like the day before the big deadline. So this is where being able to take a step back and say, what are those things that are just really draining me about my job right now? Is it the way that you interact with somebody? Great. If it is, if we get clear on that, we can hit reset and say, what can I control? Maybe I can control actually holding up a mirror to that other person and saying, hey, Sarah, I just wanted to call something to attention that I've been noticing. I've been noticing that after the project is submitted, you've been second guessing what we've submitted. And I just really want to know, is there something else I'm not seeing about how these projects are getting done? But you can choose to say and take control and put those things out there. Oftentimes, human beings get into sloppy behaviors. We all do it. We're all doing things that are practically unconscious sometimes. And so there are things where we can reset with other people, expectations, habits. I also find that there are so many things we might be doing on our own that are our shoulds. Oh, I should make sure that there's always cake for somebody's birthday. Well, but if you hate stopping at the store an hour before you go in to pick up the cake, what if you just stop doing it? Like, if there's a vacuum, if someone cares about it, someone else will come in. But even bigger things like reports. So many times we are in the habit of, we've always done this report. But if it takes a disproportionate amount of your time and it's not in your superpower space, does anybody need it? Is that information actually accessible in other places now? We can drop all of these types of balls, and often without even asking anybody else, just by making a choice over what do I control, and wait to see if anybody notices.
I love that. Like, just do it, because I think you're right. And especially there's something about the female psyche too, I think, where, we're like, oh, but I have to do it this way. And especially who like our listeners on this show, we're the type A perfectionists. So it has to be done a certain way, and, and all this stuff. And it's like, no.
And for that, if you have I always say that we really want progress over perfection, and progress is what feeds the human spirit, knowing I am moving forward, knowing that there's something I am contributing, something that is meaningful, more so than perfection. Recognizing you don't control everything is often a big eye opener to people who have put a high value on perfection, but recognize all that's doing is causing stress and anxiety. The image that friend of mine who's a Buddhist taught me once is that if you pick up a handful of sand, if you squeezed it really hard, it's all going to filter through your fingers and the sand will be gone. But if you pick it up and hold it lightly, the sand will stay there. And I often think it's that way too with, the things that we want. When we're just squeezing it so tight, all that does is tense us up and make us worry more and make us wonder more, instead of saying, okay, I want this thing. I'm going to keep moving forward with it. I'm going to treat myself with respect and see where the next step is going to go. So I think that there is no such thing as perfection, but it might be perfection for you is to have a different feeling or a different experience. And one of the things I'm seeing right now too is that we did a lot of things at the beginning of the pandemic. We sprinted into a lot of, here I come to save the day, emergency behaviors, right? But some of those have now hardened, and now we're still doing them the same way, even though our work, our lives at home have shifted into a marathon. Maybe it looks different than it did 3-4 years ago, but the muscles you build to do a sprint are very different than the muscles you build to do a marathon. And this is a great time for anyone who's stressed out in their current job, who even is thinking about a change, that before you take that level of stress and anxiety and all that it brings, to say, what is it that I actually control? And maybe where can I take that control right where I am, just as I am? And often we can find some things that really make a difference for us and for the experience we're having in our life at work.
Absolutely. There's so much power in that for everything. Because I think, especially with the pandemic, there was so much that was reactive. And now it's like, then we settled, and in some ways there was actually less on my plate, I found. But, we can also get stuck in those patterns of like, have to do it this way. But you're right.
Well,
it's like our health, our life, our families, all of that.
Right. Both ways, doing too much or doing too little, or, saying, oh, well, it's not the right time. And that's the lizard brain again, that little part of our brain that's just trying to protect us and hold us down. But I often will talk to new clients who they describe the feeling like this, like, I got one foot on the gas, like, I'm ambitious, I want things, I want to grow, I'm really interested in my field, and then one foot on the brake. It's like, and I can't get motivated, or I stop and start, or I can't decide. And that's the conflict of the brain versus, what I call the whispers, the true internal heroic self. And we've got to be able to talk back to the brain to be able to let ourselves get into the action that's right for us, whether that's taking on more strategic action or doing things toward who we want to be, or getting rid of some things that are getting in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting we're having this conversation right now, because this is something that's been coming up for me a lot. And, I transitioned from having a physical practice and staff and all of that stuff into I'm virtual now. And I have a couple of assistants that are virtual, but it's very different. But I found I can still get caught in these patterns that are not healthy and that I did not like from, what I was doing before. And so I'm like looking at, how do I take control of my schedule? Who says I have to have back-to-back clients on the days that I see clients? Like, why is that a thing? Just challenging the shoulds, like they're always there. And, and taking the pause and the time. It's like this week, I'm like, I kind of want to do a deep dive into this. And before I grow anymore, like build, look at, create what really is within me that I want.
Yeah. And the suggestion that I always make on that, the two things is, one, to get super clear on your values, because, and this actually is a chapter in the book, and there's an exercise in the book and a supplemental exercise that you can get for free, that helps you go through and clarify your values. Because a lot of times I believe that if someone just said, hey, what are your values? We would throw a couple out, but we haven't really done that deeper dive to say what is most important to us, because all of your decision making plus your perceptions about others are all filtered through your values. So, for example, I had a client who they both worked on the same marketing team, but in different roles and at peer levels. And one of my client, she valued inclusion, like she liked to be part of things. It was really important for her. And this other peer of hers kept leaving her out of meetings. And so it caused frustration, it caused conflict, because it was rubbing against her value. But when we actually stopped and kind of looked at the behaviors of that other person, just from afar, right? Not even asking her, we realized that person valued freedom. And so when they actually had a conversation, when my client did what she could control, which was speak up. If it bothers me, I need to speak up. And she found out that the other person was making decisions thinking it was helping my client, because she valued, the other person valued freedom. So she's freeing her from those meetings, as opposed to my clients thinking of it as being anti-inclusionary. So values are really important for us. I almost think that any conflict we're having in our lives, work, family, anywhere, if you look at what's really going on, you have a value conflict. And there's no value that's right or wrong. It's just two values that are in conflict with each other. It's kind of like two keys on a piano. each one is individually beautiful, but you hit them both together side by side and it's just noise. So getting clear on your values, I think, is important when you're looking at those things and saying, why am I still doing things this way? And could I make some different choices that are more aligned with what's important for me now, what I'm really valuing right now?
Yeah. I think that's huge. And being willing to look at it, because I know I did a whole bunch of work when I was growing my original business and did some value, exploration. But and this is something I've been working through because I've basically been limiting my self-expression for my entire life. I had this big realization this weekend, but I would rely on like the values of my staff and, the other people who are part of this community that I was building, not really wanting to own my own leadership and my own role in it. And so I think it's incredibly important that we get, like, even if your people are your family, like you have to get really clear on your personal values and also like what are the values of an organization. And I would argue a lot of organizations and big companies actually don't know or like their teams don't have them. So that's somewhere we can be a catalyst. But yeah,
I totally agree. And when I talk about values, I don't mean the stuff that's up on the wall for a company. It is really what are the decision makers, whether they're conscious or not, that influence your behavior. So, and I do think that even though some will argue they stay foundational over time, I think when you go through major shifts, and who hasn't been through a major shift recently, but a transition like the one you made from having a brick and mortar, in-person business to having a online business to having a worldwide audience, just shifting the things you're doing, there are things that change. And I think revisiting your values, revisiting your long-term vision. I often will work with clients to just do a looking back vision exercise. So pick a date in the future. Maybe it's 10 years from now, maybe it's 2 years from now, but maybe it's 30 years from now, but looking back, what do I want to have seen? Like, what am I seeing? What am I grateful for? Where am I living? Who's around me? What am I proud of? And sometimes looking forward helps us reverse engineer. Great, so here I am today. What do I need to do? What steps do I need to take to get closer to that longer term vision? So getting clear on that can also help make decisions around the way you're working. And because if the way you're working isn't working, it's all an experiment. We get to try something else. And I think that's even in corporate environments. We get to try something else, even sometimes within the exact same job. We just have to realize it first.
Yeah. So cool. So interesting. So it sounds like, and obviously everyone go read the book, but from your perspective, like this is the work we need to do before we make a change or decide like, hey, this job's not for me, or because otherwise you're just repeating the same thing over and over.
One of the trends that we're seeing right now is, I call it the great resignation becoming a great regret. Actually, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning about retirees in the same way, that maybe it's up to 20 to 40% of people who retired during the so-called great resignation are now either looking to go back to work or regretting that they retired. And I get it. I think everybody makes the best decision they can for the moment that they're in. But one of the things as a culture, we've trained people that when something goes wrong in your life at work, that your only option is to go somewhere else. It's like, oh, well, I'm not really happy at work. Oh, go find another job. Lots of people are hiring. You're really valuable. But we're not really teaching people how to look at what they have, how to think differently about what might go on, and to recognize where they may be causing the stress for themselves, where they may be interpreting, making assumptions about things, about what's possible and what's not. Had so many people that I've talked to that have said, I made an assumption that there's no growth there, and I left, and then another friend of mine, there were these 5 things that happened, for her because she asked for it, or because she was clear about what she needed. So I do think that the job search world is just as hard as staying stuck in a job where you feel crap. So the only thing you can do is take back control. And you don't have to not job search, but while you're there, stop living in the experience of your job being awful. Get clear as to what is it that's bugging me. Is it this person? Is it these expectations? Is it the workload? And you can find something in there to take back control, to be able to at least make some incremental change on that and experiment with different ways to be able to test out what's going to help your work better for your life.
I love it. And I think that's such a new concept that we can kind of wrap up on this thought. But, so many of us, it's like our lives have to be designed around our job. And that was what my experience of owning my first business was like. And I hated it because I was a single mom with a little kid. And I started the business when he was 6 weeks old, and I missed a good part of his childhood. Like, I hated it. And I had the capacity to do something differently, within that, but at a certain point it, hit that. But I think that's really valuable. So with anyone struggling with this, like, how does work fit into your life?
Yeah, right.
Because we only have one.
And I do think, I'm grateful that more people are recognizing this, but the piece where they get stuck and feel trapped is that they don't know how. And to that person, I say, our work is all made up. And you get to take back control. You are needed. Somebody out there needs you. And so recognizing first, what is it that I need? What is the situation? It might be totally different than what you grew up with or what other people think you need. And then being able to make those decisions about the things you control, to experiment, to craft it, to make it up in a way that's going to work for you. There's no right or wrong. The world of work is very shifting and diverse all the time, but I'd say life is too short to stay stuck in something that's not working. But what if where you're already working could be made to work for you? Those are the possibilities that I'm excited when people are willing to explore and dig a little deeper on.
I love it. That just gave me goosebumps. Darcy, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation, because it's so applicable on so many levels for so many women across the world.
Well, thank you, Dr. Alex. The work that we do at redcaperevolution.com, which is my main business, is really all about helping people take back control over their lives at work. And we have tons of free resources. I have a weekly, I think of it as a love note. It's a little email, but it's encouragement and a tool that people can sign up for at redcapeinsider.com. And we have lots of different tools. And of course, the book, you can find out more about the book at redcaperescue.com.
Okay. And I'll put links to all that in the show notes.
Terrific.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.